So welcome to the SXM Media Culture Trends Report. My name is Brianna Mendez, Senior Manager of Sales Marketing Audiences.
And I'm Sophie Anderson. I'm the Senior Manager of Sales Marketing for Podcasts here at SXM Media.
Yes. And so SXM Media is a media group offering exclusive access to the platforms, publishers, and shows under the SiriusXM umbrella. So we're super proud of our portfolio of streaming platforms. We have Pandora, SoundCloud, SiriusXM, podcasts, including those under Stitcher Studios and partners like Team Coco, Crooked Media, NBCU, AudioChuck, and a ton of live programming via our SiriusXM satellite and live shows. And so all of this really exposes us to the rich cultural landscape that we live in today. And it's really just that exposure that led us to launching Fluency, SXM Media's culture marketing practice. And our mission is just to help advertisers to connect with diverse audiences across our growing portfolio of audio content. And our Fluency practice is made up of cultural experts who are plugged into the undercurrents of culture to fuel your strategies from the beginning and to the end. And that's just what we do. The Fluency team here loves to nerd out. We lean in and we just observe our listeners' behaviors across our portfolio. And so we're able to dive into our proprietary data sets, including platform and survey data. And one thing that's so clear is while there's so many aspects of our lives that are very distinct, very unique to our own communities and to our own cultures, there's still so many forces at play that really just bring us together, right? In so many ways that collectively we're experiencing or interacting with culture in the same way. And it is these forces that really led us to the key trends that you're going to find in this report and the key trend that we'll be focusing on in today's presentation. Oh, my friends, what a roller coaster of a journey these past years have been. Unprecedented challenges, a global pandemic disrupting our daily lives, to mounting racial injustice, economic struggles, an endless stream of just truly like dropping international events. And really just amidst it all, Americans have reacted in diverse and sometimes conflicting ways. But one thing that really has become a common ground for all of us is audio. And, let's not forget that pop culture is alive and well, like bursting with inclusivity and truly iconic moments that are just like redefining what the mainstream looks like today. We've had Beyonce's Renaissance, Bad Bunny's epic tour, Kate Bush becoming a Gen Z icon. I did not see that coming at all. All of these world events are translated, contextualized, and celebrated through audio. And it really has just become the proving ground for what's hot and what's to come. And all these moments that you see on this slide is just a testament to really how far we've come and the incredible stories that are continuing to unfold in real time. And so the world is changing, behaviors are shifting, but audio is capturing it all. And so all in all, audio is culture. It's where people go to connect with these life big moments. Audio really is that ultimate connector that unites us in these shared experiences and really allows us to dive deep into the subjects and music that we care about. So taking a look at this slide here, you can see how around these different sorts of cultural events that happen, how we lean into audio, right? So for instance, did you find yourself listening to Lift Me Up by Rihanna when Wakanda Forever was released? I was. Or Bad Bunny when he went on tour for Un Verano Sin Ti. I was bumping his album before the tour and honestly months after, right? So we see this type of behavior happen with our listeners too. 38% of them listen to audio when a movie releases and 71% around live music events. So we're going to continue to see this behavior unfold across many other key moments. And this really became clear when we saw this unravel in 2022. We looked at the top trending data across our platforms over the past year, and it told us about what we've been experiencing as a collective, right? So for starters, Encanto really took the world by storm and had people flocking to Pandora to listen to We Don't Talk About Bruno for the better half of 2022. And I'm sure you all have listened to that song multiple times. That song actually was #1 on our platform for a very long time, as we can see here on this slide. From January to May, this song was being streamed endlessly on Pandora. And then we had Kate Bush, who became a Gen Z icon with her classic song, Running Up That Hill, that rose to the top thanks to the nostalgia-driven world of Stranger Things, show on Netflix. This tune, of course, evokes those fond memories of those who listened to that song back in the day, but also demonstrates how these younger generations can really reinvent and reinterpret these classics. And so throughout the year, we're also going to see a rise of internet viral trends and new queer anthems that are highlighting today's era of diversity and inclusivity.
So, as we dug deeper into our audience listening behaviors, we saw a really tangible sort of evolution of emotions and shared experiences that we summarized across these 5 major trends. Namely, we really saw that listeners were craving context, especially when it came to news and historical podcasts, with the rise of misinformation in news and media and just polarity in politics. We really saw listeners were hungering for reliable reporting, and they increasingly began to value a diversity of opinions and perspectives in that storytelling, more so than ever before. Another trend we noticed was this growing desire amongst audiences to protect their peace and really discover and focus their energy and time on content that helps them enter a better headspace. Feeling good mentally and emotionally has become as much of a priority as feeling good physically. I think that's something we all have a new appreciation for post-pandemic, and music and podcasts have really become a safe space that listeners can rely on to help them feel their best. We also saw nostalgia go viral. I'm sure many of us noticed, out in the physical world, the return of some big fashion and beauty trends from the early aughts, like the denim maxi skirt and the Pamela Anderson inspired makeup looks. But this is something we saw in audio as well, from rewatch podcasts diving into the best entertainment of the past, like Laguna Beach and The Office, to classic songs from iconic artists like Kate Bush or Dr. Dre finding their way to the top of the charts again after being featured on Stranger Things and in the Super Bowl halftime show. And then in terms of fluidity and pride, this is the trend we're really going to be diving deep into today. But at a high level, we really saw listeners' hunger for content that encouraged self-expression and really empowered them to feel proud of who they are and allowed them to relate and identify more closely to people like them. And lastly, we really saw the world come alive again with the return of IRL events and concerts, music festivals, stand-up comedy, podcast live shows. I think we all experienced a real appetite and strong desire to return to in-person after being isolated for so long. And that had just been building and building since the pandemic. And finally, we saw that people were able to kind of make those dreams a reality. And as Bree mentioned, that really expanded into audio because people were just hoping to extend the lifespan of those real life event activations. So to focus in a little bit more on fluidity and pride, which is what we'll be covering in depth today, what does it mean? For us, the way we've defined fluidity and pride is all about artists and individuals embracing their unique identities and really challenging societal norms. So as diverse talent has risen in music and in podcasts and just built global popularity, these artists and these creators are staying true to themselves and making a powerful impact. Americans are not only observing this growth, they're really leaning in and diversifying their content consumption and just actively participating by breaking cultural barriers, sharing music, and holding meaningful conversation around the subject matter. And I think this trend really represents a cultural shift that we've seen towards increased representation, self-acceptance, and just a celebration of our differences. So cultural pride, like I said, is really at an all-time high, and people are embracing their unique backgrounds and identities. there's just a growing sense of pride and belonging that you can see across various communities. Obviously, you can see 93% of Black listeners surveyed said they're proud of their culture and identity. 91% of Asian listeners said, I'm proud of my Asian culture and its accomplishments. 91% of Hispanic listeners say, I'm proud of my culture and where I'm from. And 69% of LGBTQ listeners say they're proud of their LGBTQ identity. And when we dig in and look at sort of the intersections of these groupings, intersectionality really plays a significant role. 88% of MC listeners who identify as LGBTQ said that they're both proud of their racial and ethnic identity as well as their LGBTQ identities. So, I think that this is just a testament to the growing diversity in the American population and the pride that's complementing that growth. And I think that digital media is really enabling and allowing for individual cultures to shine, just given how shareable music and podcasts are and how accessible those mediums are to such a vast array of distinct voices and unique stories. So when we look at podcasts specifically, we really see that across different communities, they're serving as a vehicle and an avenue for people to connect to their culture and communities, with Black listeners leading the charge there. We're also seeing that overwhelmingly, people are turning to podcasts for that diversity of perspectives and opinions that they can't necessarily get in mainstream media. And I think that this is something that is one of the big sort of inherent value props of podcasting. And I think that it's helping to sort of drive this trend as well.
Yeah, and in music, that also plays a huge role in the expression of culture and identity, and has just become a medium for these individuals to really connect with their roots and express themselves. And of course, for Black, Hispanic, and LGBTQ listeners, music is an integral part of their lives. So the majority of Black, Hispanic, and LGBTQ listeners say, music is part of my culture and part of who I am. But almost half of them say music really allows me to express myself. And I think ultimately, what we're going to continue to see in this presentation is how fluid we are in terms of expressing ourselves culturally. And today it's become harder and harder to really put, genres in a box, or these musicians or the music that we listen to, right? And I ultimately think that music is reflective of the cultural fluidity that we're all experiencing today, which is why, music is that connector, right? That allows us to really connect to who we are and how we ultimately want to express ourselves in the world. And we're seeing that with artists and creators, right? They're going to continue to share their stories and really celebrate their roots. They're fostering, of course, the sense of unity and pride with their listeners, because they can find those communities, they can find those listeners who can relate, who can connect with the music that they're creating. They don't need to cater to anyone else. It can just cater to whoever connects with the medium. And what's also so beautiful is how artists today are just really breaking barriers and making history, all while staying true to themselves and really embracing their unique identities. So let's take a look here in this slide. We're seeing a couple trailblazers on here who have dominated the charts, as we talked about in the beginning of this presentation. We don't talk about Bruno. 2022, like, what a smash hit. This is a movie about a Colombian fable, right? A Colombian rooted story that became an international success. Yes, it won the hearts of Latinos around the world, but it won the hearts of everyone, right? And so incredible, just like a very specific, nuanced, like, fairy tale was able to capture the hearts of so many. And then, of course, Bad Bunny, our king, our Puerto Rican king. I'm a very proud Puerto Rican over here. He is so unabashedly Boricua. He'll speak Spanish in his interviews. He'll throw in all the Puerto Rican slang in his album. And we see him now winning Artist of the Year at the VMAs, headlining major events like Coachella. And he's going to continue to really dominate the charts and dominate music, but just being unabashedly himself, being unabashedly Puerto Rican, and so beautiful to see. And then what's even more interesting with him is that, yes, he has started his career working in the reggaeton and urbano music space, but we see him really branch off, working with like rock elements and Jersey beats, etc. Right? So he really is not even confining himself within his own genres as well. And then Sam Smith, Kim Petras, what a milestone, right? They came out with a collaboration, Unholy. I mean, breaking records as the first openly transgender and non-binary artist to hit #1 on the charts and to also win a Grammy for this track. I mean, just breaking that glass ceiling for so many LGBTQ artists to also really enter these spaces and take up all the space that they deserve. And then SZA, our sad girl queen, love her, SOS, her second album, gained over 12,000 album station ads on Pandora. And I think ultimately, SZA does embrace her vulnerability. She embraces her softness, something that is so important for Black women today. And she's been able to connect, of course, with Black listeners, but fans around the world as well that can really connect to her sensitivity. And so all in all of these artists are really paving the way for these future generations. They're showing that specificity can really thrive. We don't need to confine ourselves anymore. We don't need to sort of fit a quota. And being authentic and staying true to your self-expression are really just the key ingredients today to capture mass audiences. And this is, of course, a playbook that brands should really take note of. And so SoundCloud really just has to become a playground for creators looking to experiment and collaborate. I always like to say the SoundCloud really captures the breadth of creativity that we're seeing in audio. And so many genres have been born on SoundCloud and really has just like fostered a safe space for artistic expression today. And we've had some very distinct genres that pop up in the scene. And it's really cool because SoundCloud, when creators upload a track, they can add tags to sort of describe the genres, right, of the track. And so we're able to track all the different genres that are starting to grow in popularity, two of which are digicore and SoCal soul. So digicore is really interesting. It is a subgenre of like electronic music, but it's very much characterized of like distorted and glitchy sounds that's very much inspired by video games, but with some aggressive beats and some heavy bass, throw in some trap. We see a lot of artists, a lot of young Black and Latino men really experimenting with this genre and has really just grown in popularity with the likes of rappers like Lil Uzi Vert. And then we have SoCal Soul. It's a subgenre of house music, and it's originated in Southern California. And it's influenced by funk, disco, R&B, and really just featuring groovy bass lines and soulful vocals, right? And so it's these innovative genres that really offer listeners a chance to really explore fresh sounds, fresh perspectives, while providing these artists an opportunity to connect and collaborate, right? The artists who are experimenting in SoCal soul and digicore, right? They're tapping into their online communities that they're finding on SoundCloud to find producers, to find musicians, to find singers, right? That they can create and continue to expand what these subgenres sound like. And so as the music industry evolves, artists are embracing this fluidity in their genres and really expressing their unique identities. And many of these talented musicians are also proudly showcasing their queerness, really enriching the music landscape. I think it's been especially difficult past year being a queer person in America, but none of that is really going to silence this community. And they're going to continue to be unapologetically themselves. And what's beautiful is that they're using music as that medium to share who they are loud and clear. I mean, we have Janelle Monáe. She has been in the scene for quite some time, a multi-talented performer. And we see her experimenting with funk, pop, R&B. She just came out with an album. I believe it's called like The Summer of Pleasure or something like that. If anyone in the chat knows the title, please drop it in. But she's a proud pansexual, and she is also using, that album to really, showcase like Black sensuality and, being able to speak on her queerness and her love for women. Just incredible project. Highly recommend you check it out. And then we have Viano Antiano. I feel like many of you may not be familiar with her work, but if you are, please drop it in the chat. She is a Puerto Rican trans rapper and activist that is just using her music to really take up space in a genre that hasn't always been welcoming for LGBTQ artists. And seeing a trans woman being able to rap on a track with some of the biggest Latin artists in Urbano is incredibly refreshing. She teamed up recently with one of the biggest producers in the game, Bisa Rap, and dropped a viral track that is now giving her global recognition. And of course, just another artist that's going to continue to pave the way for more trans artists and LGBTQ Latinx artists to take up space in these genres. And then Steve Lacy, a Gen Z king. I mean, he has been in the game since he was a teenager, working with Kendrick Lamar. He identifies as bisexual, and he talks about a lot of his sexuality in his music as well. But we also see him just like fluidly experimenting with R&B, groovy funk, and just, of course, tapping into that alternative space that he really thrives in. And it's incredible to see how he's been able to chart in this past year. The song Bad Habits went viral on social media. I believe reached in the top 3, maybe number 1, kind of bumping off Harry Styles off his place on the charts. Seeing a young Black queer artist really take up space and just really redefine what pop music sounds like. Pop music really isn't what we've, have been listening to pop music from back in the day. He's allowing alternative sensibilities really take up space on the charts. And so all in all, these artists are pushing boundaries in music, but really inspiring others to really embrace their true selves and really break free from traditional constraints.
Yeah, and I think on the podcast side, we're seeing a really similar pattern in terms of an increase in creators who are focusing their storytelling and focusing their conversations around self-identity and self-expression. And again, that sense of pride in who you are. Just last year, we launched a show called Vibe Check with 3 queer Black journalists who cover news and current events and make you feel as if you're just in the group chat with them, getting all the details in just sort of their friendly speaking voices, the way that they would discuss things with their peers and with their close friends. And I think that is something we're seeing more and more of in news and political podcasts that really didn't exist a few years ago. We also see creators like Kid Fury and Chriselle continue to find immense success with their show, The Read, which celebrated its 10th year this year and remains one of the biggest podcasts in existence. Both of them do such a great job of balancing conversations around pop culture and celebrity gossip with conversations around mental health and queerness. And they really integrate that subject matter into their discussions seamlessly and in an accessible way that I think are a great breath of fresh air for a lot of people who have been tuning in loyalty over the years. And then lastly, we wanted to highlight Jamila Jamil, who started her podcast iWay as an extension of this social media movement that she had formed to really encourage at first women and now transcending gender lines, everyone to really just feel comfortable in their bodies and comfortable being who they are. And we see her bring on thought leaders and activists and intersectional feminists to have conversations that dig into what it means to be proud of who you are and comfortable with who you are beyond even just your physical self. So I think we're really getting a lot of the same traction on the podcast side, and it's really compelling to see that these voices and these stories are filling that need that we've identified, that listeners really, really hunger for. So in terms of what's next, I think, one of our best litmus tests is really Gen Z, in terms of the celebration of individual cultures and identities. Gen Z really leads the charge. They're the most diverse generation yet. And they're really completely unafraid to share their unique backgrounds. And in fact, 50% of teens in this age group define themselves by their race and ethnicity, which is a 120 index compared to millennials. So it really showcases the importance of cultural pride for these young people. And then 45% of Gen Z members say they actively support diverse artists and musicians, which really demonstrates their commitment to celebrating the vast range of voices and stories that exist in the music landscape. And so by championing diversity and inclusivity, Gen Z is really setting us up for a more vibrant and dynamic future, where everyone really has the chance to shine and be heard. So I think that's what we can expect looking ahead as Gen Z continues to mature and set the stage for future generations.
Amen, Sophie. And this is just really becoming the new norm, right? And the way that we're allowing to ourselves to express fluidity, to be proud of our culture, but to really redefine how we can truly express ourselves. And so these are all things that advertisers really need to take note as they want to really connect and influence these consumers, right? So to make most of the growing trend towards fluidity and cultural pride, go beyond the months, go beyond the traditional month-based approach that we all know very well for multicultural targeting, go beyond the Hispanic Heritage Month, definitely go beyond Pride, go beyond Black History Month, etc. Focus on building those authentic and relevant connections with various communities throughout the year. And luckily with audio, there's so many touch points that you can continue to lean in and connect with culture in really cool ways and resonate authentically with these audiences. This will not only boost brand affinity, but really just drive that purchase intent in the long run. You will connect with these consumers and ultimately cultivate longevity. And then 2, support these next gen voices. Stay ahead of the curve. Support the emerging artists that we were able to talk about in a couple slides back. And there's so many more, especially with platforms like SoundCloud that's cultivating the next generation of talent, right? These are the artists that are really redefining self-expression, connecting with new communities, and expanding, the ways that you can do so. And so when you're able to get in on the ground level, you're going to be able to tap into the trends that are shaping the future of music, create meaningful connections, but that's also a way to cultivate longevity, right? You start investing in building these young artists and their growing fan bases, and they will stay with you along the way. And then lean into the afterglow, right? Of course, there's the after shows, award shows, music festivals that are very significant sources of music discovery for these listeners, but you can extend your advertising strategy beyond the event date itself and truly capitalize on the continued interest and related content on various platforms, right? So the conversations that are going to happen after an award show on different podcasts, right? Or, the playlists that are set up on Pandora and SoundCloud leading up to all the music festivals this summer, right? There's so many different touch points that your brand can surround around these key cultural moments that we're all engaging in. And then, of course, this approach will truly ensure maximum visibility and engagement for your brands.
Thank you, Bree. Hope everyone enjoyed that presentation and just getting to know the trend of fluidity and pride a little bit more. In order to contextualize things a bit, we have a great conversation lined up. A special guest will be joining us. Please welcome Sarah Esocoff, the creator and host of Sounds Gay, which is a Stitcher Studios podcast that explores the intersection of music and queerness. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Hey,
Thank you so
Sarah.
much for being here. We're thrilled to have you. For those that haven't listened to the podcast, please follow and subscribe. It is an amazing, amazing um, piece. So, Sarah, just to kind of kick things off, would you mind just introducing yourself and talking about telling us a little bit about how you got into podcasting?
Yeah, sure. My name's Sarah Esocoff. I've been working in the podcasting space for about 6 years. I came to it from a comedy writing background, interestingly, and then I've worked on a bunch of different shows. Most recently, I was producing Seth Rudetsky's Back to School, which is a celebrity interview podcast, for a couple of years. But this is my first project that I kind of created and I'm hosting, and that's more in that like documentary style.
Amazing. And so to get more into Soundscape specifically, like we mentioned, it really explores the intersection of music and queer identity. What prompted you to dig into that subject matter specifically? Why did you want to sort of look at the topic through the lens of music?
Yeah, so I've always been drawn to queer stories, not only because I myself am queer, but I also think that queer people in general are sort of primed to think about their lives in terms of these big questions or big kind of universal themes of identity and gender and community. And when you're working on a story, you're always looking for those bigger themes that are going to help people relate to the story. And that just comes really naturally with queer stories. And I think likewise, music is something that is really, really tied up in people's identity and that really creates community. It's also music and queerness are two things that, you might get your music taste from your peers in middle school or high school. And I think a lot of queer people end up learning about queer life from other queer people too, since there's not so much mainstream representation. So I think because of that, it felt like a really natural pairing.
Yeah, and I can truly identify as a queer person myself, how integral music is in terms of our community, right? I think about the ways that I've been able to really connect with the LGBTQ community in New York, and that's in music spaces,
Yeah,
that's in
totally.
clubs, bars, parties, right? That we're able to come together and and unfortunately those are the very few spaces that we're able to do so. And Sarah, I think like what you do so beautifully with Sounds Gay is able to like really capture, right, like the spectrum of queerness and how it's reflected in music. And the rainbow is representative, right, of the LGBTQ community because we represent so many colors and so many experiences, right? And I love that the approach, right, that you have with this podcast so far is a sort of like mixtape style, right, that's like mirroring those varied experiences within the queer community. So can you tell us more about like that approach and how you're able to really capture these unique experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a cliche, but there are as many ways to be queer as there are queer people. In this season, like we couldn't even come close to covering the full rainbow, the full spectrum. But we did want to get as much kind of breadth as we could, which is why we took this approach of like a mixtape or anthology style where each episode is really going really deep into a completely different story, a completely different world or subculture. And the season really runs the gamut. We have an episode about queer Christian music, battle rap, 2000s emo, the like Brooklyn trans punk and hardcore scene, like really all over the place. And I think like what you were just saying is so true, where like queer people aren't, it is all about that intersectionality, right? Queer people are not like a separate community. There are queer people in every community.
Exactly.
And I think a great example of that is like our battle rap episode. Battle rap is a very kind of like macho scene that I think a lot of people might not realize that there are tons and tons of specifically lesbian battle rappers. Like half the women battle rappers are gay. And that's something that like I didn't realize. But queer people really are in every music scene, and they have been such a huge part of creating music culture over decades and forever.
Yeah, and I think that that's like what we're seeing right now with these younger generations in terms of this idea of fluidity, right? And I think the fluidity allows us to really redefine the way that we're able to express ourselves, but also really breaking the mold, right? Like, wow, like I didn't know that there were so many lesbians in battle rap, right? That's so incredible, but that really is deconstructing the idea that we may have around that particular part of culture. And then contemporary Christian music, like queer musicians that are playing in that space and expressing themselves, right, in a difficult space to do so, right? So I mean, I've with all the research and the stories that you've been able to tell so far with this podcast, like what have you found most surprising?
Ooh, I think what's been most surprising is or I don't know if it's surprising, but I'm just so surprised by the things people tell me in every interview. Like there are always so many things where I'm just like, whoa, like my mind is blown by that. Like, like this revelation about how queer the battle rap scene really is. I kind of went into that story imagining that it would be about how hard it is to be like the one queer battle rapper. And it's like, and everyone I talked to was like, no, like there are so many queer battle rappers. And so apologies, there's a siren outside my house, but the story became something totally different. So like there wasn't any one episode that I went into that like became what I thought it was going to be at the beginning of the reporting process.
Yeah, and I think all in all, right, like we exist everywhere. The LGBTQ community is in all corners of life. And I think, of course, systematically for generations, decades, that, we have been silenced and we have been erased. But of course, in these past few decades, we've been able to really step into ourselves and express ourselves. And of course, with the changing times, we're able to take up more space. And so I love that, with this podcast, you're really able to like capture the ways that that's happening in music. So like, why do you think music really is that powerful medium for the LGBTQ community to really express themselves?
It really reminds me of our third episode, Filipino, which is about Filipino and emo culture. And the episode's about these two friends who are musicians. They're both trans, they're both Filipino. And in the episode, they write an emo song together to kind of like explore both of these themes. And one of the friends, Koji, talks about how when they were growing up, their parents were basically told like, don't teach your kids Tagalog or any Filipino languages. And so Koji feels this real sense of like not like they don't identify strongly with the English language, even though it's the only language they know. They talk about how like it'll never be kind of sufficient to express themselves. And that's one of the reasons that they love music so much, is because it's a way to express yourself that transcends language. And I think that's such a powerful idea for a lot of queer people because, a lot of queer people, labels are really important ways to identify ourselves. But for other queer people, labels really feel inadequate. And I think music is a way to move beyond labels and language to something way more universal.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, we're going to continue to see that evolve over time, right? So do you have any predictions, in terms of other music subgenres? And I know that's kind of be hard to do, but, or just based on your research, right? Like, what does the future really look like, for, queer representation in music and how it's ultimately shaping the music landscape?
Yeah, I don't know if I have predictions for specific genres, but what I do definitely see is the kind of subgenres and subcultures shrinking. And I think like especially with social media, you see it on TikTok with these like very specific like aesthetic trends or like micro influencers. I think like people who are interested in these really niche genres are able to find each other online through social media and create these smaller but like very authentic feeling communities around these much like smaller trends and smaller subcultures and subgenres. So I would say that's like kind of the biggest trend I see.
And yeah, I think it's only, it's going to become more and more micro, but, with that, you're going to get more engagement. And I think
Yes,
in the
exactly.
advertising industry, it's it sometimes can be all about scale, but in the end, they really want that engagement. They want to build that long-lasting connection, and these micro communities can really be that vehicle to do so, which is cool.
Yeah, I think there's like real trust among those communities, and especially with podcasts, because like, people talk about how podcasting feels so intimate and the community that builds around them feels really authentic. And I think like, despite them being smaller, they are like there's more trust there.
Yeah, that's kind of the perfect transition to our next question. In my role, I spend a lot of time kind of thinking about the power of podcasting, what makes it, such an intimate and authentic medium, and what makes its listeners so passionate and loyal. We really do see audiences being more leaned in around podcasts than traditional media like television or streaming television as well. And I'm curious to get sort of your assessment of why that is the case. What makes it such a great medium for stories exploring identity? What makes it feel like a safe space to listeners that are tuning in?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you watch a documentary on TV, you feel very separate from what's happening on the screen. It's like you're watching from the outside. But when you listen to a podcast, at least like for me, like I relate so strongly to all the stories that we talk about in this season, like even if it's not something I've experienced directly. And I think that the way people listen to podcasts and the way that community builds around like listenerships of certain podcasts just has this like much more authentic and active feeling. And I think part of it is that if you're listening to a podcast, like you are seeking that podcast out and choosing it. There are hundreds and hundreds of podcasts to choose from. Whereas like if something's streaming, you might just like be on the front page of Netflix and be like, sure, but like if you're listening to Sounds Gay, you like, probably heard about it from your friend who was like, you got to check out this podcast. It's so cool. And so I think it's just like a much more engaged listenership, which is why, like, again, there's that trust there. And I also think that creators of podcasts have their audience in mind in a more, like, they're speaking to a more niche audience. Like my team and I talked a lot about, like, when we were making this show, it kind of reminded me what you were saying about Bad Bunny, like how he'll like speak Spanish in interviews and stuff like that. Like we were like, we want to make a show by queer people for queer people that everyone is welcome in, but we're not like sort of toning down the language to appeal to everybody. We're like, this is for the community. And so I think listeners can feel that.
Yeah, I think you're really right. I think in part that's also due to like, with traditional media, there's so many like levels to the hierarchy. You have to run things up the ladder to get it approved. And I think with podcasts, the creators really get to have a hand in shaping the story. So yeah, I think what I'm hearing from you is really like there's this mindfulness like on both the listener and the creator side that's like making for a more deliberate sort of relationship, I think. Yeah, I think that was put so well. I'm going to borrow your language down the line. When we kind of pivot back to advertisers and marketers, and we look at how things have played out historically, a lot of them have really relied on binary methods to identify their target consumer, focusing on men or women, or blanket market segments like multicultural. But, as we've discussed throughout the presentation, the listener identity has become a lot more nuanced than what meets the eye. And, with that in mind, we're wondering sort of what advice you would give to advertisers who want to connect with intersectional communities and queer communities authentically.
I think it's all very related to a lot of the things we've been talking about these smaller spaces, these like smaller but more dedicated listenerships. I think my advice would be like go where the queer people are and work with queer people in that specific community, on wording and messaging and things like that, because there is so much trust there. And I think a recommendation in that kind of community goes a really long way. And I think, as we've been saying, like just marketing to like queer people in general there are just so many different queer experiences. And I think the more kind of targeted you can get and kind of get to know a specific community of queer people, will go really far.
I think that's really sage advice and a good note to sort of wrap up on and see if we have any questions coming in from the audience. Everyone feel free to engage in the chat or in the Q&A feature as well.
Yeah, and I think we have one question, but before we start, we have our culture trends report with all the trends that we found in the past year on this website, culturetrends.sxmmedia.com. Please check it out. It's a lot of fun. You can nerd out on some data. It's interactive, a lot of audio clips and video. And yeah, just being able to really just look at the way that we're connecting with our biggest moments in culture. All right. So first question from Daniel, how can I use SXM Media to reach media creators? I have a new SaaS that supports podcasts and video producers. Sophie.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we really prioritize at SXM Media is offering a wide range of opportunities, from bespoke activations to more turnkey. So I would say, that's something that you really want to work with your podcast seller on to make sure that you understand what's available. It's really helpful to get more insight specifically into who your target demo is so that we can help, pair you with the right creators, the right voices that really complement your strategy. So I think that's the best approach to finding out which storytellers are going to pair the best with your messaging, and then which tools we have in our arsenal that will give you the scale you need to really make an impact.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's the only question that we've had. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Please check out the Culture Trends Report online. It's so cool. You'll enjoy it so much. And thank you, everyone,
and
for
check out
the
Sounds Gay too, which is new this month. Thank you again, Sarah, for joining us. Your insights were so valuable, and I think they just provided such tangible evidence for some of the trends we've been looking at on a broader level. And we really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Bye, everyone.